Hey there and welcome back to my channel. Today I plan to take you on a bit of a journey from a beginner's point of view as I experiment with a new medium that I haven't touched before. That's right, today I'm taking a look at oil paints. And is it something a beginner with a year or so experience painting miniatures can pick it up and run with it with only a knowledge of acrylics? Why oil paints, you might say? It's always felt like I've been missing out on something essential. So today I just want to break the ice, get my hands into it and just see exactly what all the fuss is about. But before we go and dive into the oil painting, let me just refresh your memory. This is one of a series of videos where I explore new mediums and new techniques that I haven't tried before. So far I've attacked a fire elemental, and that was my very first look at inks, acrylic inks, through the airbrush, and it was pretty interesting. I'm looking forward to playing with inks a little bit more, but today we're looking at the water elemental. So I'm using some blues, and we're going to be using the oil paints for the very first time. So in this experiment, I'm going to be embracing my position as a beginner, as a complete newbie to oil paints, and you can watch along and learn some of the lessons that I will no doubt learn without making mistakes yourself. And if you're a seasoned oil painter, I would love to hear in the comments if you have some hints and tips for people just breaking into oil paints. So by the end of the video, we'll see if oil paints can help really bring this model to life. So let's find out. Let's head to the airbrush. So here we are applying a zenithal coat, which is a white to act as a light source on a black prime. This is my go-to when I'm doing priming on my models. One, it gives me a good look with some of the textures, brings out some of those details on how the model's going to look, and gives me an idea of where the light's hitting and where the shadows are hitting for that desired model. Also, it's pretty good practice for the airbrush, which at this point I can't get enough of. And the main reason for putting the primer on at all is to give our paint some adhesion to the model. So it sticks to the primer, and this gives the paint, first the acrylic, or if you're going straight into the oil, either or, gives it something to bind to. And a really good method here is to use some colours instead of black and white. You can use your shadow, which might be a dark blue or purple, and some of your highlights, yellow, red, something quite different. And by using a zenithal type approach, you can really see how you need to transition on those bigger contrast models. So here we are at the airbrush. I want to get some blue tones onto the model over all of the water. So I'm going to do this first using the airbrush. We're going to go for a darker blue deep in the dark recesses of the model, deep in the water of the model. Then I'll do a mid-tone blue. This should hopefully give me an idea of where to apply some oil paint when I get to it. But yeah, it will give me a look at the colour scheme and how well this model is actually going to look once it's done. Airbrushing is great for getting really smooth transitions. Does require a little bit of practice, so with my zenithal and doing this as an undercoat, it's a really good way of me knocking in some practice on the airbrush as well. I do own a range of airbrush specific paints, so this is a good way to use them up as well. One thing you might get used to when you're starting to use your airbrush is masking as well. I'm not going to in this model because I'm doing it as an undercoat, so I'm going to paint over all of this with the acrylic where it needs to, or in this case the oil, which I'm going to use. So basically being an undercoat, giving me some idea of where colours are going to fall on the model, the highs, the lows, the mid-tones, etc. So now I've got an idea of how the model's going to look. You can see from the model it's covered in blue. I really want to bring out those small details now before we move into the oil paints. So I'm going to grab the acrylics, grab my brush, and we're going to jump in, and I'll get some of these details worked out, some of the armour and some of the metal work. One, this will bring that contrast out. The model will start looking like a painted model, and then what I'm going to do is put a clear coat over the top of this once I've done the acrylic, and then attack the oil from there. This way, if I need to, I can use some white spirits, dab it on a Q-tip, and just remove anything that gets onto my acrylic paint job. course at the very end, one of the things we can do with these small gems is paint it with a high gloss varnish at the very end, even if it's over a matte sealing finish, and this will make them appear glossy, give them some natural shine as well. Alright, so at this point we're going to dive into it. I'm getting my first hand experience with oil paints. Sure, they're a set of cheap paints that I brought just to experiment with. We'll see if I can adapt to this, and if we do, then we move up into some more expensive oils. At this point I'm pretty excited to get it on. Let's see what the differences are between this and acrylics. And this is the step where we apply a foundation of oil paint on top. So basically we're applying some colour schemes on, but what I'm looking for is a layer of oil paint covering everything I plan to work with, and then we're going to let that sit for 10 minutes, 20 minutes, half an hour, and then we're going to remove it back off. So we'll use a sponge, we won't use spirits, we're just going to basically pull it off the model, and we'll see what's left underneath. And then this will leave us a slight oil residue over that whole surface, and this will be our active surface that we then apply and remove more oil paint from. That's in theory anyway. It was quite a little bit different actually applying this in person. Yes, it is quite messy, definitely more messy on the palette. Goes on semi-thick, and the brush just feels completely different applying it than a glaze or something we're more akin to with our acrylic paints. The palette is a mess. I've got oil everywhere. I should also note at this point I've set aside some brushes to now be my oil paint brushes. Once I've applied them in the oil and cleaned them out with some white spirits, etc., they're not really going to be good for acrylic paints again. So they're not my finest brushes, not my best brushes, but something I'm dedicated to put aside. So here we've got some sponges. I've got an arrangement of tools. I'm going to try a couple of them to remove the paint. We'll see how well they work. At this point, let's just get the paint off. I'm feeling at this point that the undercoat with the airbrush wasn't required. I don't mind, it gave me some practice with the airbrush, but I don't think you would need it if you were going into the oil paints. The zenithal would give you the highs and the lows, and you'd be able to apply the oil paint straight away. The downside of the fact that I have done an undercoat in blue means I can't really tell how much the oil paint has stained the model itself while I'm taking it off. So I'll have to save that for the next model I do with oil paints to see just how much that initial stain is. But once all this paint is off, the next process is to apply some more paint on top again. So this is where we can start slowly working with that active layer that they call it of oil that's on the model. So I can apply some more dark blues down low, some midtones, and some of those highlights all in one go. And then I've got a blending brush set aside, and we use this to basically move the paint around the active layer, blend it in. This is where we get our blends, and we're actually removing that paint off again, whilst leaving that slight, now blended mix of paint underneath. So from here, it's a matter of repeating this process until you're happy. One thing I've noticed is the brush control is quite different. It feels a lot different. The method itself, as the paint applies, the blending brush as I'm blending and removing the paint, is very light touch. It blends so easily, which just goes to show you how active it still is. And there was a point I walked away and left this for a day, came back and kept adding it, and it was like I hadn't left. So it does give you a chance if you need a break, need some sleep, need a break from your model painting, to go away, come back the next day fresh and just pick up where you left off. Also noticed a very light touch when I'm applying the wet paint on top. It does come off quite easy, but because everything is so active, the paint on my brush and the paint on the model at the same time, I found the tip as I was applying the white to try and get a very nice white, and it's probably not the ideal color to be trying to put on top of such a dark blue, but it blended at the tip of the brush very quickly. So you can see I've had to use the side of the brush to use some of that paint, and because it's not watered down at this point, it's not a wash, it's not flowing to the very end of my brush anymore and refreshing it with white. It's ended up blue mixed on the tip, so I'm using the belly of the brush to apply on some of those high points. And the two things that I had read about, which I've tried to apply in my method of doing this, is not using an absorbent palette. So I'm using plastic. I do plan on getting a ceramic tile one, and of course the white spirits is odorless that I am washing my brushes out with. So all in all, I'm pretty happy with how the model came out. I dipped my toe into the world of oil paints, broken the ice, and now it doesn't seem as daunting as it did when I first bought that set of oil paints. Hopefully this might have broken the ice for you as well, enough to maybe go and buy some oil paints and give it a go. In particular, this model, I think I could have achieved the similar, very easily results with acrylic. I don't think it particularly brought much to the model, but that's because I played it pretty safe. I'm pretty stoked that it didn't ruin the model, so all in all I think it's a pretty positive view, and I am looking forward to maybe painting some bigger surfaces, looking at moving a bit more and getting a bit more blending done with the oil paints. I think it was a lot of fun, and I'd highly recommend, especially if you've got a 3D printer, print out a couple of minis on the cheap and buy yourself some oil paints, prime them up and give it a go. It's a lot of fun, and I can definitely see where I could use this in some future painting. So for now, that was our look at oil paints. So at this point I still have 2 models remaining to experiment with. These will incorporate, one I think I will do a bit more with the oils. I might look at some oil washes, and I'll definitely be reincorporating in some of the inks, and we'll try some different attacks than I have previously. If you don't want to miss these videos and a deeper look at these mediums, maybe hit the subscribe button. If you found this video interesting, maybe leave us a like. And if you have anything to add to the conversation, leave a comment below. It's been fun. I'm looking forward to the next one. Thanks heaps. See ya.